So each and every one of us has a vision of what an end of the world scenario or a massive disaster situation would look like, or SHTF, whatever you want to call it. Whatever that image is in your head, well, I'm about to shatter your dream. So let's get into it. Hey, welcome back to another episode of The One Row. My name is David. Welcome to the channel if it's your first time. If you do end up enjoying this kind of content and these kind of videos from me, please smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Let's dive into it. So I kind of preface this in the intro that, you know, if you're looking at an SHTF, end of the world as we know it, massive disaster scenario, we all have visions of what that would look like. Now, the thing is the reality of what you're envisioning may be a fantasy, an absolute prepper fantasy. And we're going to dive into it. And basically, you know, when you're looking at that kind of a situation, you're looking at either potentially like a lone survivor thing, like maybe it's just going to be you and you're going to go off into the woods or the wilderness, or, you know, through grit and determination and your knowledge and capability, you're going to survive on your own. Maybe that's what you think is going to happen. Maybe it's you and your wife and a couple of kids, and you're going to do A, B, and C. You're going to go off to a cabin that you know about, and you're going to take it over, and you're going to live there. And maybe it's, well, you know, I'm going to have all these people come to my place, or me and all my friends and families. We're going to meet at this one place, and we're going to form this prepper community and live off the land and defend against marauders. And maybe that's what you're thinking. But whatever your fantasy is, let's talk about where I'm at. So I got into gear and camping and stuff when I was a teenager. I learned to shoot from my dad at like 9 or 10 the first time we went shooting a pump action 22 that he had. And he had a Colt Huntsman 22 that I learned my first pistol probably when I was like 12. And I've been steadily shooting pretty regularly from then until now. And there have been some gaps where I was more into it or less into it. But for the most part, I've been into it ever since. I've been into prepping from really, you know, as soon as I basically got into my first marriage and whatnot, I started storing food and started doing preparedness stuff. But we lived in Utah at the time, right? I was 21, 22, 23 maybe. I had camping gear. I had a couple firearms. I was a pretty avid shooter at that point. And you know, my family and my first wife's family were back on the East Coast. So if some disaster happened, really the best opportunity would be for us to somehow make our way back east where our families were. And so the first thing we had to do would be get out of the valley in Utah, across the Wasatches, and then across the Rockies, and then slowly work our way east, right? At 21, 22, you know, it was the best the best plan we could have, right? Was to get out of the cities into the mountains. Obviously now looking back on that was a little naive. That my plan was to drive 1,800 miles or whatever it was back to Georgia. The reality is in a disaster scenario, the mobility is going to be very, very hard. First of all, if you are in an area, particularly a city, and you are going to be traveling outside of that city as soon as the disaster hits, the reality is by the time that you realize you need to leave the city, it's going to be so incredibly hard for you to leave the city. Interstates are going to get blocked. Bridges are going to get blocked. It's going to be very hard to move. Now, if, you know, that's just kind of the reality of the situation. Now, that's not to say you can't overcome that. Maybe you can be proactive. Maybe you can go on foot, ride bicycles, you know, motorcycles, some electric bicycles, whatever the case may be. You can overcome some of these things, right? So I'm not saying it's impossible. But if you're in a major urban environment, getting off of Manhattan, you know, into New Jersey to then work your way west into the country, that's going to be a challenge unless you leave early. You know, the reality of me crossing 1,800 miles, you know, off of the gas I had on hand, which would take me maybe 400 miles. And then after that, what am I going to do? Well, unless I leave before the disaster hits, the reality is we're going to be on foot for a lot of it. Or siphoning gas if possible, and risking all kinds of whatnot to get there. So long distance travel is realistically, it's a fantasy. So if your plan takes you, you know, what I'm going to do is we're in Virginia right now, right? So I'm just outside of Washington, D.C. in the country, about 45, 50 minutes fairly rural area on the edge of a small town. So when a disaster hits, you're most likely, your mobility is going to be most likely very, very dramatically impacted and hindered. So fantasy, I guess, fantasy buster number one is wherever you think you're going to go, it better be close or you're not going to get there, most likely. Now, if it's a regional disaster, like a hurricane in Florida, and your plan is to go to Tennessee, you're going to just move inland up into the mountains and avoid the hurricane and ride it out up there for a while. That's probably realistic. If we have an EMP, if there is a nuclear attack, if there is some kind of massive solar storm or some sort of actual like civilization into the world as we know it situation, you're not going far unless you're going to go on foot. And even if you're going to go on foot, that increases the risk of being killed, robbed, all your gear stolen. Now, the second fantasy is that maybe you are, you're an empty nester and it's just you and your wife, or maybe it's just you and you're alone. And if something bad goes down, you've got enough gear and grit and determination and knowledge that you're going to ride it out for a while, and then you're going to hit the road and just survive. I feel like being alone is better than being in a small group with mixed skill. Now, if you're in a group of 3 or 4 or 5 people and they're all exceptionally well trained in firearms, very disciplined, maybe prior military, very physically fit, et cetera, that small squad can be enormously effective in survival. But if you have a mixed group, say like it's you and your wife and a teenage kid and a 18-year-old, right? So you got 2 adults, 2 kids. You're the only one maybe trained. Maybe your wife's got some training and she's comfortable with the firearms. She's comfortable and she's in decent shape. But then you got the kids. That's rough. That's really rough from a survival perspective. Let me explain. If you're solo, okay, the advantages of that are, well, you don't have to worry about anybody yourself. You can move quietly. You can stay hidden. You don't have to communicate with other people unless you want to. It's much easier to cover your tracks. You don't have to find food for multiple people. If you're saying, for example, staying at home, you don't have to have as much gear to survive. The downside of being alone is, particularly if you are trying to stay home, you're only one person. You can only fire one firearm at a time. You can only cover so many entrances to your home at a time. You're massively disadvantaged from a defensive standpoint because you're one person. And so if you're having to assault a position or you're having to defend a position, you're massive. In either scenario, you're screwed. So your best bet is to lay low, hide, and then use the ability to stay stealthy. That's your key advantage, right? So it's possible. And obviously, if you're by yourself, you can't have watches. So when you sleep, you have to sleep somewhere very, very secure, somewhere very nondescript, so that you can actually stay under the radar. Another thing to bring up into this conversation is, time from the disaster into the future, right? So like when a disaster hits, for the first couple of days, things might not be too bad. People, have a couple of days food in their house, right? They have water for a couple of days. But if services stop, the electricity stops, city water and plumbing stops, and there's no deliveries to grocery stores and there's no gas coming to the gas stations, after 2, 3, 4 days, people are going to start getting desperate, and it's going to be very ugly for a while. It takes a normal person several weeks or even months to starve to death if they have water. So you're going to have this time period from a couple days into the future, which could be very, very bleak, very violent, that it's best to lay low and hide, right? And blend into the crowds, if that's possible. If you're staying at home, stay in your house, avoid contact with other people to the greatest extent possible. Don't let on that you have reserves. If you're a thick boy like me, lose weight. Literally put yourself on a restricted ration diet immediately, so it looks like you're suffering like everybody else, right? That's just like rule of thumb, whether you're by yourself or with a small group or a large group, is go on rations immediately and lose weight, drastically lose weight, and force you to do it. Because if you're sitting fat and happy after a couple of weeks and everybody else is gaunt-faced and sickly looking, well, they're going to know that you're lying. We talked about the solar survivor. What about the small family, right? So the small family, from a, you're at home situation, it's a better situation than if you're by yourself, because you at least have you and potentially some other people to help defend the home. Now, it's not ideal because you have various levels of training. If it's, you, your wife, and the teenager and a young son, for example, well, maybe you, your wife, and the teenager can help, fend off entrances to your home, fend off intruders in the yard, et cetera, et cetera. But once you're mobile, you're really limited by the weakest link, which is probably going to be your youngest child. Their inability to carry weight, their inability to have the mental fortitude and toughness to push through things. Maybe it's going to be your teenager is going to not mentally be able to. Maybe it's your spouse. I mean, whatever the case may be, man or woman. Some people just are not mentally equipped for survival very well. Sometimes you might be surprised, though. Like when you get into a real situation like that, the inner warrior may come out from the unlikeliest of people. You have a little bit of an advantage with that small mixed trained group at home, and then you have a little bit of a disadvantage when you're moving. Actually, a severe disadvantage when you're moving. It's going to be harder for them to move quietly. It's going to be harder for them to have the determination, grit, toughness to carry the weight, to walk the distance, to have the discipline necessary to, keep your noise down, to limit communication, to watch where you're stepping, to not leave a trail, all that stuff, right? If you're mobile. Now, if you're in a situation of it's a small group, but it's a small, well-trained, fit group, that is a nightmare for everybody else, because you've got a small unit that can move lightly. They're trained. They know how to. They know how to hunt. They know how to work as a group. They've got potentially some military training, or at least a lot of outdoor skills that they can work together. They're disciplined. They understand what's really going on, and they're probably pretty tough. That is a really ideal situation from a defending a particular location, or if you're on foot. Now, lastly, is if you're in a larger group. Now, a larger group, from a defensive standpoint, is a great place to be, right? If you've got 10, 12, 14 people that can handle firearms and you've got a couple acres that long-term you could actually grow enough food to support that size of a group, and you have, immediate rations for the group to survive until first harvest, that's a really good place to be. Like, that's a good place to be too. Now, the problem is if that size of a group, if you have to move, becomes a nightmare to move. Because at that point, that large group is going to have weak links in it, whether it be somebody's kid or some elderly parent or whatever the case may be. So moving that size group is going to be very, very challenging. And the biggest thing about that large group is resource management. So getting all of those people to, one, get to your location, two, to look like to the neighbors, to the community around you, whoever that might be, that you're losing weight, that you're suffering just like everybody else. Now, you may have food to get through the winter into the spring and late summer, but you're going to have to lose weight. You need to have pain up front, and you have to have that whole group of whatever it is, 10, 15, 20 people or more, need to all be on the same page. I used to think that smaller groups were better, and I've actually come to the point now in my thinking where I think large groups are better in all scenarios. You have to account for the food requirements, nutrition requirements, and then travel limitations if you do have to leave or you're forced out. With a larger group, you're going to have a greater diversity of skills. So you might luck out and have a doctor in your group or a nurse. You might have a plumber or an electrician or different tradesmen who can bring some very interesting skills. Maybe you've got a couple guys that are former military guys or police officers, et cetera, et cetera. I think the point still stands is that larger groups are going to be better for defending, for creating a community, because the larger the community is that you can create and maintain, the more likely you are to be able to start to rebuild in a realistic and long-term sustainable fashion. Now, when you are on the move, if you have to move as a group, you're moving as a larger group. And so you're not moving in a way to hide your tracks necessarily or move as quietly because, well, one, you realistically can't. And then second, most people that you come across are going to be smaller groups than you. And I think there's value in that. Obviously, this is all just kind of a mental thought exercise of the right way to think about doing things. And realistically, there's no perfect way to do it because they all have benefits and limitations. And thinking about how you can protect you and your friends and family in a disaster scenario, particularly a long-term disaster scenario, is very advantageous. Think about it now. Think about where you're going to go. Like, if you have to leave your home and you have to go somewhere because of a disaster, whether it be local or regional, to a safer place, where are you going to go? If there's not clearly a safer place, but you can't stay there because there's no more food or no more water, where are you going to go? You're going to go to your parents across the country? You're going to go to your brothers a couple states away, or to some buddies up in the woods? Like, I mean, these are all things that you want to think about as part of your disaster preparedness. Because again, this where this channel is going is gear and preparedness and trying to be a better parent, a better husband, a better father. And I think all of that kind of weaves together into the concept of being ready for whatever life throws at you. And hopefully you found this video, this little thought discussion, interesting, a little helpful. Maybe it helped make you think of some considerations. But before we end, what is your plan? I don't want to know the details. Like, I don't need the GPS coordinates to your bug out location. But are you a lone survivor, gonna go up into the woods by yourself? Are you gonna build a small community, or are you just gonna take your family and hunker down until you have to evacuate or rebuild where you are? Anyway, I'd love to know. Leave a comment below. Let me know kind of what your thoughts are on this. And if you ended up enjoying this, please smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Thank you so much to the Patreon community for your continued support. We'll see you next time.